Inversions or inversion shapes are positions we use to play chords and how we can start learning to play chords in different ways. These shapes are really useful to get familiar with whatever kind of music you're learning, so we need to start working towards being able to find them, recognize them and play them fluently. And here we're just going to focus on major and minor chords. In the last video I showed you that you can figure out chord inversions by starting off in root position, so having the root on the bottom as your lowest note. We're going to use C major as our first example. And then you can take the bottom note off and put that on the top, like that. And then you take that bottom note off, put it on the top, and then that bottom note off and put it on the top, until you're back at root position. This gives you the different orders that you can play those notes in. Now we want to practice actually being able to play these and flow through them to start getting used to these shapes and positions visually and physically. And we're starting off with chords with just white notes in. That is the best place to start to do this. First we'll just look at how to play each individual position and then we'll get on to moving between them. When you play chords in real situations, you end up using different finger positions, and it depends on what else is happening, where you've just come from, where you're going to next. There's often different ways of doing things as well, but you're trying to find something that's going to help you move around smoothly. So what we're going to try and do is try and get our hand to closely match the shape that the chord makes on the keyboard. And then we're going to try and mold our hand into that shape. And we really want to pay attention to the shape that each of these positions makes as well. So this root position shape has got this nice even spread, 2/3 on top of each other if you like. And there's all different ways you can play that. We're going to start off with our right hand and we're going to use fingers 1, 3 and 5 like this. If playing multiple notes down at the same time is still tricky at the moment, I've got a video up you can watch which is more of a basic technique video on how to do that. There's a link for that in the description. Sometimes it can feel awkward when you first start, but hopefully that video should help you out. So we're using 1, 3, 5 here. You'll notice that it suits us nicely, every other note, and it's also every other finger. But then the next position is first inversion. That makes this shape on the piano. So notice how we've got a slightly bigger gap here. This gap is a fourth. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 notes. It spans 4 notes, so we call that a fourth. And this one here is a third. So the way we can make our hand match that shape is using fingers 1, 2 this time in the middle note, and then 5 again on top. And as you can see, if I put those fingers out like that, 1, 2 and 5, my hand is making that shape as well. I've got a small gap here and I've got a bigger gap there. That fits in nicely. So now I'm on the notes E, G and C. And then the second inversion shape is these 3 notes, G, C and E. And now you'll notice that this shape is backwards compared to the first inversion shape. We now have this bigger gap of a fourth on the bottom and the third on the top. Remember, it's really important to recognize how the overall shape of this looks. So now we're going to go back to fingers 1, 3, 5 like we did on root position. We've got that bigger gap on the top. So if we use 3 and 5 for the third at the top, then our thumb is easier to stretch over bigger gaps like that. So make sure you get each of those positions individually on their own first before we practice trying to move through them. Something I like to do is to, let's say you're practicing the second inversion shape, play the chord, take your hand off, pull your hand away, and then try and find it again. Make sure you keep coming back to the same combination of fingers each time. And to challenge that a little bit more, each time you could try looking away, so you have to visually find that position as well. So to move through these positions then, which is a really good way to get comfortable with them, before we can actually play anything and even start thinking about the technique of moving, the thing we really need to do is to get the visual side down. The thing that trips people up is losing track of the notes when they lift their hand up to move from one position to the next. This is the most important thing I think you can do to help with that, and it's a method you can use for other things as well. I want you to try and picture a stream of the chord and then imagine that we're moving through that stream. The easiest way to do this is like this. If you play one root position C major shape here, and then you play another root position shape up here, this forms a stream of notes. It's a stream of the notes of that chord C major, and that stream does continue up and down the piano, but we only need to really focus on this area that we're using. I think this is a really important thing to do because the visual and mental side of playing can be a massive barrier between you and practicing good technique. If you're not sure where you're going, it's hard to move nicely between positions. So when you try and see that stream, I want you to try and block out the other notes that aren't in the stream. It's easy to ignore the black keys in this case, but I want you to try and ignore those other white keys. Imagine they're lighting up in your mind. And then once you can see it, all we're really doing is we're moving through 3-note chunks of this chord stream. These 3, then the next 3, then the next 3, and then the next 3. And I think thinking like this is important as well because it sets you up for the future where you'll be playing chords in lots of other ways as well, spreading the notes out in different kinds of voicings. So if I just get rid of some notes, you might end up playing these notes, but with experience you'll be able to see them coming from a C major chord. Sometimes you don't play every note in the chord as well. An important tip to help with this is to make sure you have a good sitting position at the piano, and so you're sitting up nice and tall, and then you're not leaning your neck down too far. That's good for technical reasons, obviously, but it also helps with your view of the piano. If you have a nice wide view of what you're using, that's going to be much easier to keep your eye on everything. Sometimes when people do things like this, they have a zoomed in view, so they're just really focusing on that first position. Then the next note, which is this one that they're going to come to try and play next, is kind of out of their field of vision. So they lift up and then they've suddenly got to find it, and then they get lost. Or they do find it, but they're so focused on finding that one, they lose the other 2 notes that were meant to stay the same. Because when we do move from this position to that position, these 2 notes stay the same. So that sounds easy, but because you have to move different fingers to those notes, it feels like you have to find them again. So you've really got to try and keep your eye on the whole thing. Just quickly, if this video has been helpful so far, then please click the like button, as that will be really helpful for the channel. And if you have any questions, then please let me know in the comments below. So we're going to practice jumping through these positions up to the next root position and then back down, but we're going to build up to that. So first of all, we're just going to move from root position to first inversion and get used to that. So coupling your image of the stream with when we practice those positions individually, we're going to go from root position. Remember to keep this nice hand form. Don't be dipping your wrist down or anything like that, or pushing out with your fingers like this. And remember, we want to keep this nice natural hand position with slightly curved fingers, and we're going to use our arm weight to help bring the keys down together evenly, directing the weight through our fingers to the keys. Don't push into the keys any more than you need to. Just let your fingers feel the bottom of the key bed and don't keep pushing down once it's down. Let your fingertips just kind of grip and hold your arm steady. Make sure your arm is feeling like it's holding its own weight up. Then when we come to move, we're going to let that weight release. Let our wrist relax, and when our wrist relaxes, make sure your arm is feeling like it's holding everything up. When it's in this position, everything here should be loose and relaxed. And when it's like that, your hand is much easier to remold into the next shape. Try doing this as a warm-up to get that feeling for yourself of controlling your arm weight to kind of drift across the keys whilst keeping a really relaxed wrist and hand as you move between positions. Play the root position, lift up, let your wrist relax, let everything hang loose. Use your arm to move over, and because it's relaxed, you can start remolding your hand into that position. I'm not moving directly sideways, there's a very slight arch over the top from one spot to the next. Play this chord, up, relax, move, remold, come back down, and do the same thing. If you like, you can practice going back and forth between these 2 positions for a little while until that feels good. And then we're going to add on the next position. So all the technique stuff I just said is going to be exactly the same. Relax, remold, up, relax, remold, come down in that position now. And so we're building up, so then you can practice going from root to first to second a few times. Remember to keep an eye on those finger positions. 1, 3, 5. 1, 2, 5, back to 1, 3, 5, and make sure you're sticking to that. In the future, you want to become a lot more versatile and you can use different fingers, but when you're first starting this, it's important to try and get a routine and some muscle memory built by using the same fingers. If you like, you can practice just first to second for a bit, and then you can build up to going all the way to root position at the top. If your wrist is too rigid, your arm will look like this when you lift it up and move it. But if you feel the lift coming from this side of your wrist and let it hang loose, it will naturally droop very slightly as you move. And this is much more relaxed. You're getting rid of any excess tension that you're using. And then as you come down, obviously you have to just engage it a little bit again so you can grip the next chord position, and it'll feel much less awkward. Again, if you like, go from second to root, isolate that. If there's any particular weak movements, you can isolate it and do that specific thing more. That's always a useful practice method. And once you've got comfortable, I won't repeat the whole process again, but you can just copy the same tactics for starting at the top and then working your way back down. And then when that's comfortable, you can try going up and down. And as you're moving, try mentally picturing your hand shape and how it's going to fit into that chord shape. Then once you're comfortable on that C chord, you might want to practice just on that one for a good while. I don't mean for 3 hours in one go. I mean, come back at it for a few days or whatever you need to do. The next thing to do would then be to try the other white note, major and minor chords. The great thing about these is, although we have a combination of major and minor chords, actually there's one diminished chord at the end, the B diminished, even though they're different types of chords, so the spacing is really different because we have different amounts of half steps in between the notes, so we have different intervals creating different chords. The actual physical shape just of the white keys, if we ignore the black keys, is the same. So that means physically playing them and moving through them is going to feel exactly the same. So when you're practicing a new chord, you then want to picture the stream of that chord. So if we're on D minor, if we can take that root position shape here, we play it again up here, that gives us a kind of miniature stream of this chord. And then we can picture the 3 note chunks of that chord that we're going to be jumping through. So the first 3, the next 3, the next 3, and then the next 3. And you can repeat that for whatever chord you're on. And although the notes are different in these chords, and you do need to pay attention to that, of course, you also want to have a good sense of a feel of the pattern and the shapes, because that's going to help you practice them and make all those different chords feel like the same thing. So focus on the size of the gaps between the notes in those different positions, and using your hands and your fingers in the same way for each of them. But you can imagine the same tactics. So from D, we can lift up and move to the first inversion, then to the second, and then to the root again at the top and back down. Again, you might want to try those individually first. And it will feel a bit harder again when you do a new one because the notes are different. But once you've done a few, hopefully it should start to feel easier again once you get used to that pattern. So these chord positions are such a staple, fundamental thing that we use in music. You want to keep this as a fairly regular practice until eventually one day you won't need to do this kind of thing anymore at this level. But we want all these chords and these positions of playing them eventually to become part of our natural vocabulary so you can use them without thinking. It's not something that we particularly end up practicing constantly to get faster and faster at, like scales, we might do that kind of thing. But you do want to end up getting in a little bit of a flow eventually, so you can eventually move through at this kind of speed. That probably sounds quite fast at the moment, and I don't mean you've got to get there next week, but the idea is we want to get in a bit of a relaxed flow. Now, of course, another great way of practicing these is by breaking the notes up, and we just call that broken chords. I think it's better to practice the inversion jumping first, and then once you've started to get used to that, you can look into broken chords. I like to teach those with a specific kind of technique, so there's not time to get into that in this video. I'm going to do a separate video specifically on those at some point. So yeah, practice all those white note chords, and you may as well practice the B diminished because it's got the same shape. But then we've got lots of other major and minor chords you need to learn. Now let's look at some chords where the third is a black key. So in root position, the black key is in the middle. I would start learning this group of chords next once you feel like you've mastered the ones that are all white notes. So because they all have a black key in the middle in root position, that means that when we jump through the inversion shapes, that black key is always going to be in the same spot. It's going to be in the middle, then it's going to be on the bottom, then it's going to be on the top. And that kind of gives the chords a similar physical shape on the keyboard that we need to navigate. And again, with these chords, you want to picture their chord stream. So with D major, if we take a root position here and a root position there, we're going to have our root position shape, our first inversion shape, our second inversion shape, and our root position shape again at the top. Now these are going to feel a little bit harder because I think the black key makes it a little bit more physically awkward when you're a beginner, and I think it makes it a little bit more visually confusing as well to jump through those positions. So you might need to work at these ones a little bit more. But if you follow the exact same process, often if you have a good practice method for something and you're patient and you stick with it, that's the key to success. So remember, with chords with black keys in, you often need to hold your hand a bit further this way, a bit deeper into the keyboard, and don't play the chord at the very tip like that, because that's a bit awkward. You haven't got too much of a grip, and if you do that, it's awkward to get these fingers in, whereas if you bring everything forward, you can get your hand down in a much more comfortable position. With these, at some point, it is definitely worth practicing different finger positions, although for the beginning, I'm just going to say use the same fingers as we did with the white keys. So 1, 3, 5 for this root position. This first inversion pretty much definitely wants to be 1, 2, 5. Again, remember, hold your hand forward. If you have your thumb right on the edge of that black key, you're going to cause your wrist to twist around like that to get in. It's really awkward. Just bring everything slightly forward and you can keep your wrist much straighter. And then this second inversion position, like I say, for now, let's stick to the same fingers, 1, 3, 5 for consistency. So yeah, you may have to do some extra work with these because the visual side is a little bit trickier. But remember, that black key will be in the same spot. It'll be in the middle, on the bottom, and then on the top. So if we did that with C minor quickly, it's in the middle, first inversion, it's on the bottom, second inversion, it's on the top. All the chords in these two groups are half of the major and minor chords we have to learn. They're the ones you're most likely to come across in the beginning stages of learning piano. And they should be enough to keep you going for a while. But obviously though, at some point, we need to start learning the rest. Now, this of course will be over an extended period of time. And you can figure out any of these chords, remember, using the method we learned in the first video, or you can reference that PDF I have available. You can begin learning these chords after you've started to get comfortable with the other ones, or obviously if a particular chord comes up you need for a piece of music, then do it then. They may take a bit more work to get solid because I think they are a little bit harder to see, but with practice they won't be. Organise the order you learn them to suit you, but you could perhaps move on next to the chords that start off in root position going black, white, black, and all of those will look similar to each other in their inversions as well. I'm not going to go through all the other chords individually, but I just want to point something out important about hand positioning. So with chords that go black, white, black, you need to make sure your hand is forward enough that you can come down on all the keys together like that. And then when you move through the position, you need to maintain that line, so you're bringing your hand more in level with the black keys, so you can keep more or less a straight wrist as you do it. And then when you move through to ones like this in particular, it's really important because if I bring my hand too far back, look, I'm just bringing my thumb away from the black key. So make sure that when you come down on the chord, you're not like putting these two fingers down and then twisting round like that. Get it forward first and then come down. Stick with the same fingers we were using to start with, and like before, in the future you can become more versatile, and in the context of a song you may need to use different fingers. There's a couple of chords, E flat minor and G flat major, which only have black keys, and again you just need to keep your hand forward enough that you can grip the notes comfortably. So some of these keys, look, I'm right up here on the black key because obviously your fingers are different lengths. Your thumb needs to be down here, but this finger's going to be up there. And then there's a couple of odd ones out, B flat major and minor, and B major and minor as well. And if we just look at the first inversion of B major quickly, again, you can't have your hand back here, your thumb won't reach. You don't want to do that. You want to hold it forward so everything can stay in a nice straight line. With B flat major first inversion, it's going to be your fifth finger that you need to watch out for. So if you have it too far back, that's not going to reach. So you need to find the level that you're going to come down on before you play the chord. We can repeat this process as well with our left hand, and that's worth doing to train up our left hand. So I'm not going to go through the process again. The process is exactly the same. I'll just quickly talk about the fingers. The fingers to use to get started with the left hand are 5, 3, 1 for root position. And then 5, 3, 1 again for first inversion. And then it's going to be 5, 2, 1 for second inversion. So we've got the fourth on the shape of the chord there, spanning 4 of these fingers here, which is comfortable. And back to 5, 3, 1 again for root position at the top. I hope that was helpful. Please let me know in the comments if it was, and remember to come back for the last video, which I think is really important to learn how to practice to find these straight away. Thanks for watching.